Now, John, I want to start talking about your time playing for Australia in the World Cup. That was a very interesting time because I have to say when Italy played Australia in 2006, right? I remember watching that night because for me it was a very cathartic experience because up until then I was an Italian, sometimes with an Aussie a little bit,
Yeah.
you know. And what I found interesting that I was in a room full of young kids who were born in Australia, whose parents were born in Australia, but they were waving Italian flags. And that fascinated me. These kids should be waving Australian flags, but why are they waving Italian flags when Italy's playing Australia? So that always fascinated me, and I come to understand why that was. But for me, that night when the Aussies were going to the goal to score against Italy, my natural instinct was go Aussies, come on, let's score, let's get a goal. When the Italians was, or when that penalty happened, I was heartbroken. And for all these years, I was always supporting Italy. That night, it made me realise that I wasn't an Italian with a little bit of Aussie. I was an Australian. I was an Aussie Italian. It was a very big thing for me. What was it like for you to play against Italy wearing an wearing an Australian jersey?
You know what, Joe? Very similar to you. When I was growing up, I felt Italian because you know, whenever someone in Australia asks you, where you from, your background is Italian.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you felt Italian. When I started to feel Australian was when I went overseas and I
Yeah.
started to, live in Belgium. Then I went to Italy. I felt real Australian because they classed me as a foreigner.
Yeah.
And so, but where it was a great feeling was playing against the country of your father's birth or your mum's and remembering your grandparents, why they traveled to Australia to have a better life and how proud they would be. All I could think of was going from the hotel to the stadium on the bus was about my grandfather, leaving his family for 4 years to have enough money to then send them, bring them all to Australia to have a house, and just thinking, how hard they had it to give us a better life. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be in this position.
Yeah.
And so I started to tear up a little bit on the bus and how important it was. But I was determined to actually. I was hoping I was going to score against Italy and help Australia get through to the next round. And I was heartbroken when we got kicked out. It's still, you have to forget about the past. You have to concentrate on the present and the future. But if there's one moment I could change, and is that game there, we had the Italians on the ropes, I would say, because they were down to 10 men. We probably weren't creating enough chances at that stage. But if we went to extra time, I think the Italians were gone physically.
Yeah.
And, they got out of jail and who knows what could have happened with us. We could have got to the quarterfinals against the Ukraine and anything could have happened. But that was an opportunity missed for us.
Yeah. Was it a penalty?
Look,
how many times have you been asked that question?
Yeah, I've been asked it a lot. I've seen them given and I've seen them not given. I think now days with VAR, they probably wouldn't give it.
Yeah, right. That's the answer right there.
Yeah. The Italian player Grosso, he looked for it, but Lucas Neal went to ground. And there's one thing about you get taught as a kid, don't go to ground in that situation. He went to ground. But I'm not blaming Lucas at all because, this is after 4 games, that he was fatigued, sometimes at the end of the game, mentally, you're not as sharp. And Grosso looked for it and fell over and, the rest is history. Totti didn't make a mistake.
Yeah. I've got 2 questions about this. Often when I travel overseas and I see kids in Italy, if I see a 9 or a 10-year-old kid in Italy and I compare that kid to a 9 or a 10-year-old in Australia, they're very different. They're a lot. The kids over in Europe, I find, are a lot more cunning than the kids in Australia. They come from a history of having to fend for themselves and do stuff. Here, the kids are a little bit different. So my first question is, the Italian players, they're going to go to ground. They're going to try and milk it to look like it's a penalty, right? You know, there's this whole joke about Italian soccer players rolling over. They weren't even touched. Or someone touches them and then they just fall over. There's a whole lot of memes and videos about that. Is that what it's like compared to being an Aussie player?
Yeah, you have to understand. Like we grew up pretty privileged here in Australia.
Yeah.
Even if you weren't rich, you still had a decent, garden and
Yeah.
house, and whatever you wanted, your parents probably could afford.
Yeah.
Whereas the Italians, South Americans, other European countries, a lot of players come from very poor upbringings,
Yeah.
and the way to get out of that is to make it in whatever sport or whatever they're trying to make it in. So, I always look at it and I go, look, I understand we come from, fair play, you have to do the right thing. You can't cheat and whatever else, which I agree with.
Yeah.
But they look at it as, well, this is an opportunity for me to win a football game, to progress in my career, to end up going to play professional football. And they also believe the referee's there for a reason.
Yeah.
It's up to him to make the decision. It's not up to us.
Yeah.
If he wants to give it, he gives it. If he doesn't, he doesn't.
Yeah.
And so that was their thinking and mindset.
Yeah.
So I don't blame them because I understand the way they were brought up. You're right. They're cunning. They you would say in Italian, they're football.
Football. That's right. Yeah. Exactly.
So they're a bit sly in the way they do things, but they know what they need to do to win a game.
Yeah, and speaking of the referee, that's my next question. How much pressure would it have been on that referee to award Italy a penalty, knowing, he would have seen the way that the game was going. He would have felt that, had it gone to extra time, the Aussies might have won and caused a huge upset because Italy is obviously a powerhouse in Italy's in the World Cup every year, most in history. Australia, by that stage, hadn't been in the World Cup for how many? For 30-something years.
32 years.
32 years, right?
So you have to remember that the television audience as well play a big factor in this. Who would the FIFA rather in the next round? Yeah. And I'm not saying that they cheated. I'm not saying the referee, cheated or anything like that.
But there'd be pressure, right, on the referee.
There is pressure, and sometimes, they do it subconsciously because they go, we have to have Italy going through because, the amount of supporters that will watch around the world if Italy go through, and if Australia go through, it looked like it's, not a great World Cup. So I think that the pressure probably did get to him a little bit, but, again, I'm not saying that they did it, in a way that they wanted Italy to go through.
Yeah. And before we move on to, one of your greatest moments was the goal. The last thing I want to say is I wonder what the Italian soccer players that night were thinking when they come up against the Aussies. If you actually have a look at the list of players, there's so many Italian names. It was yourself, Bresciano, Grella, Colosimo, Simon in the team.
He wasn't in the team at that stage, but we had at least 5 players. And the thing is, they knew.
And not only Italians, you had other names in there which were ethnic names too. I wonder what the Italians thinking. Are these Aussies? Is there any Aussies playing for Australia, or are they all Wogs?
Who knows what they were thinking? But the game before, we played against Croatia, and I think we had about 7 Croatians in our team.
Right.
So it was sort of like. But then, you know what? I don't know if they realised, but that's Australia.
That's exactly right. People don't have no idea.
No, they don't. And and this is where the sport helps, and this is where the World Cup. Everyone that looks at our names and going, well, actually, Australia's a very multicultural country, and and very accepting of bringing other nationalities in, and so I don't know what the Italians were thinking, but they would have probably been laughing at some of our names. They go, how many Italians they got in their side?
You're right, John. I mean, when I travel to Canada and America a lot, the amount of people that have got no idea how multicultural Australia is incredible. And I think, shows like the movie Crocodile Dundee and Crocodile Hunter, I mean, they did great for putting us on the map, but they also did equally as much for not making people realise how many ethnics there are in Australia. We are... And I think Melbourne got voted. Toronto at one stage was the most multicultural city in the world. I think Melbourne now is. So, it's a great thing. It's a great
Yeah,
thing.
and I think this is the beauty of soccer, is that we can touch the world, because it's a it's the world game, and it's the number one sport in the world, and we can actually show what Australia is, really what Australia is,
Yeah,
and we're probably the only sport that brings the whole nation together. Because every different ethnic background,
yeah,
it's probably the number one sport from the country where their parents or grandparents
yeah,
came from. And so that's the beauty of our game that we've got, and I think playing in the World Cup highlights it a lot more.
yeah. All right, John. Now I really want to chat about this moment because I know you and I have chatted offline many times because I'm very much into to experiences and motivations and that kind of thing. And we've chatted, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted you here on my podcast, is because one of the reasons that I get very interesting people is to show my viewers and listeners people that I've met who've got interesting stories. So tell us about, just give it a brief background for those of you, for people, because there's people here listening from Canada and America and other parts of the world who might not know what happened. So just give them a brief background, but then get it into what you did to prepare yourself to take this penalty.
All right, so brief background is that we mentioned that Australia hadn't qualified for a World Cup for 32 years. So
Yep.
in 1974 was our last World Cup. So it was 2005, and we're trying to qualify for the 2006 World Cup in Germany. And funny enough, the last World Cup we played in was in Germany in
Germany.
74.
Yeah.
So we're playing Uruguay over two legs. So that, was whoever went through on goal difference or whatever ended up going to the World Cup. Now Uruguay are a powerhouse in football, and it was their God-given right to make a World Cup, and that's what one of their best players said, Recoba. And so 4 years earlier, we got knocked out by Uruguay. We won 1-0 at home in Melbourne. We went to Montevideo, we lost 3-0. And so they thought that they were going to beat us, but we actually believed that we were going to beat them because we had our players that were playing at the highest level possible. We had experience. We lost the first leg 1-0 in Montevideo, and then we were 1-0 up in the second leg, and we ended up going to a penalty shootout. But I remember 4 years earlier, because that was my third World Cup campaign in 2005. The first one against Iran, I didn't play a minute. The second one against Uruguay, I came on for 5 minutes out of the 180 minutes that we ended up playing. And I was so upset and angry, first that we didn't qualify, but secondly that I played very little. So I remember going away from there saying, I want to be a starter in the next, qualifier. I want to make sure that I'm playing at my highest level that I possibly can. So the coach has got no choice but to put me in. And I also was saying that I'm going to take Australia to the World Cup. I'm going to score the goal to take Australia to the World Cup. So during this period, for 4 years, I'm telling my wife, I'm telling my brother, I'm telling whoever wanted to listen that I was going to take Australia to the World Cup by scoring the winning goal. I convinced myself that I was going to do that, and so come the moment, I was really ready for that moment because I believed it for 4 years that I was going to be the one that will score the winning goal.
And that has a big part to play with anything that you do. I think Arnold Schwarzenegger said, it's fake it till you make it. Pretend that you're there already, right?
Yeah.
And that I remember doing that when I was growing up. I don't remember going to bed thinking that I was going to be a comedian. I wanted to be a rock star.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to be. I used to go to bed thinking I was Simon Le Bon, I was George Michael, and then one day my dad said, no, there's no rock stars from Calabria, mate. Go get a degree and do it, and then you can do it, right? But I remember designing album covers for my next album. I didn't even know how to play an instrument, and I think that's very, very important. Okay, so go on from there.
I'll take you back because when I was 14 years old, just before I ended up playing in that state league side, I was playing the under 17 team, and I remember going to a penalty shootout. It was it was semi-final of the cup, and and I was shitting myself as the walk from the halfway line to the penalty spot felt like the longest walk in history. You know, my legs felt like jelly, and you know, I was scared because if I missed the penalty, we got knocked out.
Right.
And it was the fifth penalty taker. And you know, so normally there's 5 penalties each, and whoever comes out on top wins the penalty shootout. If you're equal, then you keep on going.
Yeah.
And but we were a goal behind, and I got to take the 5th one. And I remember putting the ball down and you know, had my run up. I kicked the ball, and I missed the goal completely. So we got knocked out.
Right.
And walking into the change room after the game, you know, my mates, they were a little bit older than me, were, you know, crying, and because it was a big thing, you know, we wanted to be in the final. And then, you know, I remember one of my teammates, he punched the wall. We thought it was a brick veneer, but it was solid brick, and he broke his wrist. And I remember him screaming. So I felt like absolute crap. And after it, I said to myself, you know what, if you ever in this position again, make sure you're ready for it. Make sure you're prepared, because I'd never really taken a penalty before. And so every time, you know, at least twice a week after training, I'd practice finishing as a striker and also practice my penalties. So
not knowing that you were ever going to be in this position.
Not knowing I was ever going to be in this position, but preparing if I ever was put in that position again.
And so you're in that position when you were 14. How old were you when you actually took that penalty?
I was 29. So
29
years, yeah.
So 15 years difference. Okay, that's important.
So during that period, you know, I started taking penalties a little bit for my club side. So, you know, I took a couple of penalties for Australia during, you know, the Confederations Cup the year before. So I was confident in taking penalties then. And then the day before the game, I remember staying behind after training and practicing 5 penalties. And it was down the end that we ended up taking the penalties.
Right.
And, you know, I hit them all the same corner, and I hit them like really nice. I had my run up marked out.
In that top right corner, right?
Yeah.
From what I can remember.
Yeah, top right corner. And I hit him so, and I remember Lucas Neal going to me, why are you hitting it the same side? I said, well, I'm on the bench. If I come on, it might be in the penalty shootout. I'm only going to get one chance. I'm not changing my mind. I'm hitting it this side, and I want to feel comfortable. And you know, I did. And I remember going back, you know, before we went on the team bus, asking the team manager, you know, where are our families sitting? And
in the stadium.
Yeah, in the stadium.
So you knew roughly where they were going to be.
So he told me, he said, over in that corner, he said, why? And I said, because when I score the winning goal, I want to run to where my family are.
Wow.
And you know, it seems a little bit big-headed now that I think about it, but you know, I had to do it because, first of all, it's a coping mechanism about you know, the stresses of a big game. That I was convincing myself that it was my time. It was going to be the goal that I would score. I didn't know it was going to be a penalty shootout. I thought that I was going to come in, score a goal. We're going to go to the World Cup, and that was the direction I was going to run to celebrate with my family.
Yeah. And at what point did you know you were going to pull the shirt over your head?
No, I didn't know that. That I didn't plan. You know, it was that came because of all the emotion of you know, maybe 15 years since I took that penalty. Maybe it was, you know, as a boy, you know, growing up, kicking the ball around with my brother in the backyard. But I do remember we used to take our top off in the backyard because
I was going to say that. Yeah.
Because there was
why
there was a big game when I was growing up. I probably would have been about 10, 11. And it was Sydney Olympic. And I can't remember who they're playing against. I think it was St. George. And a player scored right at the end of the game. His name was Chris Kalantzis.
Right.
And I remember when he scored, it was a winning goal of an important game, was a semi-final. And he ran around and he took off his top, and the commentator was Les Murray, was going, Kalantzis scores, and the crowd erupts at Parramatta Stadium. And that always stuck in my head as a kid. Used to, you know, score a goal and run around my top off. And so come the time with the penalty when it went in, it wasn't planned. It was just an emotion that just come pouring out.
So that's why you took your shirt off.
Yeah, that's why I took my shirt off. That's the reason that. But you know, when I was 14 and I was walking from the halfway line to the penalty spot, I spoke about my jelly legs.
Yeah.
This time when I walked from the halfway line to the penalty spot, it felt like I was gliding to the penalty
Right.
spot.
Completely different experience, right?
Yeah, completely different. There were 83,000 people in there, but it felt
Yeah.
like there was only a couple of people in there, people murmuring, going, if we score, we're going,
Could you hear that? Could you hear that?
I could clearly hear those sort of conversations,
Wow.
which is strange. I'm in the middle of a pitch. There's 83,000 people around, and and it was like little murmurs in the stadium, if we
That's
score, we're
fascinating.
going,
Yeah.
and all I was saying to myself as I was walking from the halfway line, do exactly what you did the day before, and we're going to the World Cup.
Right.
Because I remember my the penalties that I practiced, and
Yeah.
so when I put the ball down, I walked back to the right hand side of the post where I was kicking the ball, and the 18-yard line. So my run up was marked out.
And what were you thinking right at this moment? I mean, you must have been, the pressure on you must have been horrendous. I mean, what were you thinking? What were you saying to yourself as you were about to score this penalty?
So the walking up was more about the process, do exactly what you did the day before. We're going to the World Cup, and then as you put the ball down, you're walking back. Now there's no more process. You're just focused on that ball. So I looked at the referee who was to my left, and then as soon as he whistled, I looked straight at that ball, and my head was always looking at the ball. My eyes were always focused on the ball. So it was all about the connection then. So nothing else. I didn't think about if I score, if I miss, it was about connecting that ball properly, because if I did, I knew the keeper wouldn't save it. And as I hit the ball, I felt the connection was perfect. And as I'm looking up, I could see the ball traveling to the net, and I thought it was in. And so as I'm running off, I'm thinking I scored, but I wasn't 100% sure because it took another second for the crowd to erupt. So if you see a photo, you see me like sort of my face is stunned, going, is that a goal? Is it in?
Yeah.
And then a second later, the crowd erupts, and that's when I erupted with my top.
Wow, what a moment! That's a moment that changed your life, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, especially in Australia, because overseas, in the countries I played in, they remember me for other things. Whereas, here in Australia, that's what people will remember me for. That's where I get stopped on the street. They want to talk about that moment. Even it's funny because a lot of kids weren't around in that time, because that's it's a few years ago now. 16 years will be coming up to, and but their parents will tell them, and now with social media you can quickly look it up, and show them.
Absolutely.
It feels like a surreal moment, because I've seen it 100 times or whatever, that I only experienced it that one time
once. And like I did, I remember telling you where I was when it happened. You know what I mean? And we can't really talk about that. It's not really
not appropriate.
Not appropriate for a family podcast. But I'm sure that a lot of people would come up to you all the time, telling you where they were at that moment. I mean, let's just take a step back here. That moment, I mean, you own really. I mean, it was a team effort. I know. I mean, Schwarzer saved those goals too. Had he not saved the goals, it might have been a different story. So we've got to give him credit too, right?
It's definitely a team effort. It's the whole team. I was just fortunate enough to be in that position.
Well, you're the poster child. You're the poster. Your face is the face of that moment, and it's possibly one of the greatest sporting moments, of Australian sporting history. What's it like to own that?
The thing at the time is all I wanted to do was play in the World Cup. So it was only about playing in the World Cup. It was only about, so when you're focused on your career, you're not even thinking about what impact it has on other people. You're thinking about what we are doing to achieve this. But the impact that it's had, and I hear these stories about where people were, it makes you feel privileged that you're being able to be in that position, because I hear people. I remember the next day we were on the plane, Tony Vidma and myself, going back to Adelaide to see our family. And a guy said that he was with his dying father when I took the penalty, and he said, "You made a dying person dream come true.
Wow.
He's going to die a happy man.
Wow.
And that's when it first started to impact, what a difference it made to a lot of people's lives. And then I hear stories about people that were at the stadium, they couldn't watch, so they were hiding behind a rubbish bin. And then you hear other people say that, they were in New York watching it, and, and they just had to find the bar that was showing it. And, people all around the world. And, there was 83,000 people. I think I've met about 150,000 that say they're at the stadium.
Of course.
But different emotions, not different emotions. They all had the same emotion. There was a relief and, an eruption, but different ways of watching it. It's actually good to hear.
Now, I want to ask you this. I mean, it's fantastic, and it's a privilege and an honor to be friends with you for that, as well. I mean, apart from the fact you're a really nice guy, I'd love to know. So that guy that smashed the wall when you were a 14-year-old because you missed a penalty, did you ever speak to him? Did you ever ask him what he was thinking? Because for sure he would have been, like everyone else, watching you step up to take that penalty. And he must have been thinking, 15 years ago, I broke my wrist because of this guy. He better get this in. Well,
you know what? I've never spoken to him, Joe, and since, and I would love to, because
where you can find him, right?
I could find him very easily. Yeah, because he lives in Adelaide. He's still mates with mates of mine that I grew up with. Yeah. But I can imagine how scared he would have been. His wrist would have been hurting. He would have been going, oh no, I'm going to need another operation after this. But one day I will catch up with him and I will ask him what he was thinking and how scared he was seeing me step up.
Amazing story, John. And I mean, that's what inspired me to get you onto the podcast. I know we got to start to wrap this up soon, and we could talk forever. I got a couple more questions that I want to ask you quickly. Recently, you've had some open heart surgery. I didn't know that. I only just found that out. And you wouldn't think, a guy like you fit. And the reason why I want to talk about this is very important, because someone would look at you and go, John, open heart surgery? He's a fit guy. Tell us about that. So just to so that we use this as a platform for other people in case they need to look at getting their heart checked and they've never thought of it.
So a lot of things in life happen for a reason. And when I left Brisbane Roar, I didn't realise at the time, because normally I would have fought through that situation, Joe. I would have tried to turn it around. But there was something in my gut that was telling me, you need to go. And 6 months after it, I ended up, I was sitting on the couch and I feel my heart, really it was like I was having heart palpitations. Mm-hmm. But other than that, I felt fine. I didn't feel that bad. But I'd do a workout and I'd be short of breath and I'd go, you know what, I don't feel 100%. And because I wasn't really working at the time, my wife goes, just go get a checkup from the local GP, see how you're going. Because I think if I was working full time, I probably would have delayed it, which would have. So that was a lesson for me in general. If you don't feel that something's right, don't be afraid to go get checked up. So I remember going to see the local GP. He listened to my heart. He goes, have you always had a heart murmur? I said, no. He said, he sent me to the cardiologist and went to the cardiologist, and they ended up doing the ultrasound scan, which is an echogram. Yeah. And as soon as they saw that, they sent me into the room, and the cardiologist just wrote on a piece of paper. He just wrote severe. And I go, well, what do you mean? He said, well, you've torn a flap in your mitral valve and you're leaking 50% of your blood back into your lungs and back the way. And he said that your heart is overworking now because it's losing 50% and it's expanding. He said, if you don't have an operation soon, it could be fatal for you. Wow. And so automatically, I was sitting by myself in the room, and the actual coaching experience came into my head. That's all right, be calm, ask the right questions. What do I need to do? What are the operations? What are the procedures? Is there anything different? Who's the best surgeon? So you start to figure all that out. And then once I got out of there and I rang my wife, I was quite calm, and I said, well, I need to have open heart surgery next week. They need to repair my mitral valve. If they can't repair it, they have to replace it with either mechanical valve or pig's valve. And they gave me all the scenarios and all that. And then, I told the kids I was quite calm. But when I told my old man, I just broke down and started crying, because that was the one time that, he's been there for me sort of as my, rock. And I could be a little bit more vulnerable with him.
Yeah.
And, so, because you don't know how it's going to go, Joe. You don't know whether you're going to come out, again the same, or if you're going to wake up, you're not going to wake up. And, what actually helped me was this preparation, like you're saying, about already living the moment again of being healthy. So I wrote down on a piece of paper, the heart surgery is going to be a success. I was thanking the surgeon already for making a success. I was thanking, the cardiologist. I was, already saying, I thank you for my recovery going well and all that.
Yeah.
So that helped me a lot. Meditating helped me a lot. That I learned when I just started coaching. And so these things actually prepared me, because I tell you what, the mind plays games on you. And when you're sitting in the hospital bed by yourself, there's no one around, you start to think the worst things. So, you try and revert back to those positive things that, taught you while in my career. That helped me.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I hope that people can take away that, listening to this, they can take that. It's very, very important, what you just said, to be able to believe. And a lot of people don't know, so I'm not sure even if you do know. But my late brother, actually, today's 2 years that he passed away today, he had 3 kidney transplants. And I remember being there for all of them. I remember being, it's a very long operation. But it was, especially in the last one, saying goodbye to him before he went in to have the operation, it's so traumatic. You don't know. You don't know if he's going to make it or not. And I remember his face when he went in. He just looked at me and said, "Oh, I'll see you in a few hours." He knew, and he was like yourself, mentally so strong, prepared for it, And if if there's anything that anybody can get out of this podcast today, it's that: be positive. Always think that it's going to be good. Don't think it's going to be negative. And that's a big thing. And a lot of people, it's a simple thing, and a lot of people know about it. A lot of people don't actually practice it, And he was very funny. You said you had open heart surgery. We would talk about this, and he would say, aren't all surgeries open? Because I've never heard someone no one ever says, "Oh, I've had an open lung transplant. I've never had an open appendix removed." Why is it always the heart? But one interesting thing is I've seen, I've known you for a long time. You're a really nice guy. You're a real sweetheart. You're a gentle guy. But I've seen you when you're coaching. You used to lose it. Oh, wow, I wonder if that had anything to affected your heart, mate. The stress.
No, well, you know what? It's funny you say that, because the first thing, and the thing is, I was like that as a player as well, because you're that winning. So you step over that white line, it's about winning. And as a coach, it's about trying to get that advantage or whatever else. But I did ask the cardiologist, is it something to do with the stresses of my job? Is it something to do with what I did when I was a player, or the anti-inflammatories I took, or my lifestyle? And he said, "You're just unlucky." He said, we can't explain why there was a tear. It's like crossing the street, getting hit by a bus. He goes, "It's just unlucky." And so that's one of the things, because that's the first thing you ask is, how do I live my life from now to then? And he said, live it like you were living it before. You're doing nothing wrong. And so I didn't think I was stressed through coaching. Sometimes you get angry.
Have a look at some of those videos, mate. You screaming on the side. Okay, is that the John that I know? It's fascinating. John, we've got to start to wrap it up. I've got a couple quick more questions for you. Budding young soccer players who are listening to this, and I'd love to know, who's your favourite player in the world?
At the moment, it's Messi. He's my favorite player.
Yeah, well, okay. I was going to ask you, Ronaldo or Messi. It's very interesting because both of them are geniuses. Both of them are amazing players. But I look online and there's these, there's these forums where, nah, Ronaldo's shit, mate. Messi's the guy. How can Ronaldo be shit? Do you get that a lot?
Yeah. Look, I get it because I do a lot of stuff up to sport, which is about Premier League football, Champions League football, and so you always have to pass comment on either a team or a player. It's amazing how protective supporters get over not a team, a player. And again, look, I say Messi because that's my opinion. But Messi and Ronaldo, they will go down in history as two of the best players of all time. And all you have to do is look at their stats. They're breaking records all the time. They're different sorts of players. They're not the same sort of player. So, why don't we enjoy watching both of them?
Both of them.
And now, coming through, there's Mbappe, who's a French young player that plays for Paris Saint-Germain. And then you've got Haaland, who's a Norwegian striker that plays for Borussia Dortmund. So there's going to be other players coming through. I just love watching football. I love the sport. And whenever there's a player that's something different like Messi, just enjoy it. It doesn't matter who's the best.
Yeah, okay. And my last question to you that I ask everybody, what do you do in your everyday life to make sure that you live your best life?
I think I already touched on it a little bit, is that, I try and meditate at least once a day, if not twice a day. And I also now, especially when I was coaching, I went off a little bit, I didn't have time to exercise. So now I try and exercise at least 5 times a week. That's also just for my health, and also to mentally clear my head as well. Enjoy the time you have with your family, because again, when you get put in a situation where you don't know what's happening, tomorrow, when I went in for Arsenal, I appreciate that I've got a family that that love me, I love them, and I love their company, because my girls, before I know it, they're going to be gone. And so and do something that you're passionate about. If you can do that, then I think you're ticking all the boxes, because that it doesn't feel like work after that. If you can actually work in something that you're really passionate about, it's not work.
John, thank you very, very much. I'm glad that we had the opportunity to actually document the chat, which is a mishmash of chats that we've been having for many, many years. You're a great guy. You're an inspiration, and it's an absolute honor to have had you as a guest. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Joe. It was great being on. Thanks for having me on, and hopefully we can catch up soon.